Hey, my name's Ethan Hayes. I'm 27, a white guy living in the quiet lakeside town of Lakewood, Illinois. I work as a solar energy technician, spending my days climbing roofs, wiring panels, and chasing sunlight to power homes that folks around here barely notice until their bills drop. It's honest work, the kind that leaves you with calluses and a sense of doing something real for the planet. My life here has always been straightforward. Simple routines, early mornings with coffee black as tar, and evenings sketching out energy-efficient designs on scrap paper. But lately it's felt like a cage, one I built myself without realizing it. The air in my small wooden house at the end of Maple Road was thick that early October morning. The wind was picking up outside, rattling the windows and scattering fiery red maple leaves across the backyard like embers from a dying fire. Inside, the golden lamplight did little to warm the space between me and Sophia Grant, my neighbor who's 43 to 16 years older than me. She's a former architect from Chicago, someone who traded the city's skyscrapers for this sleepy town's calm shores years ago. We met 4 years back when I helped fix her solar setup during a storm outage. What started as neighborly chats over fence lines turned into shared dreams. Late-night talks about green building, sketches of eco-homes we'd designed together, and eventually something deeper. She became my inspiration, my confidant, the woman who made this town feel like home. But now she was the reason I had to leave. I was stuffing my thick jacket into my duffel bag, the zipper catching on the fabric like it was trying to hold me back. My rain boots, still caked with mud from yesterday's site visit, sat by the door. On the kitchen table lay an unfinished blueprint for a sustainable home, one we'd drawn up together months ago, her elegant lines blending with my practical energy notes. It was supposed to be our project, a symbol of what we could build. But looking at it now, it just reminded me of how stuck I felt. Sophia stood in the doorway to the kitchen, her arms crossed over her chest, clutching a mug of coffee that had gone cold long ago. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, strands escaping like they always did when she was deep in thought. She didn't say a word at first, just watched me with those steady gray eyes that had seen more life than I ever would at my age. I could feel the weight of her gaze, but I couldn't meet it. Not yet. "I have to go," I finally said, zipping the bag shut with more force than needed. My voice came out rougher than I intended, echoing in the quiet room. She didn't move. "Where to this time?" "Anywhere but here. Maybe back to the city, chase some bigger projects. I've got an offer in Springfield. Lead tech on a solar farm. It's a step up." She nodded slowly like she'd expected this. Sophia always seemed one step ahead, her Chicago architect instincts making her see structures in everything, even conversations. But there was a flicker in her eyes. Hurt, maybe resignation. "And us?" I stopped packing, my hands gripping the edge of the table. This was the part I'd been dreading. "Sophia, you're always here, always stable, but me? I can't do this anymore." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "Do what exactly?" "Stay. This town, this life, it's too quiet, too settled. You're content with it, and that's great for you. But it's holding me back. I don't blame you, it's just, you've been delaying my whole life. I can't keep living in this suffocating peace." The words hit the air like a stone skipping across the lake outside, sharp, final, and echoing. I didn't yell, I didn't need to, but I saw the impact on her face. Her knuckles whitened on the mug, her lips pressing into a thin line. For a second I thought she might shatter it in her hand, or maybe shatter me with a response. But she didn't. Sophia never exploded. She absorbed, like the sturdy foundations she used to design. I turned away, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind howling outside. I slung the bag over my shoulder and headed for the exit, my boots thumping heavily on the wooden floor. At the threshold I paused, the cool autumn air seeping in through the crack. Without looking back, I muttered, almost to myself, maybe if we hadn't met, things would have been easier for both of us. She didn't reply. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stepped into the gathering storm. Rain started pattering on the leaves as I loaded my truck, the sound like distant applause for a decision I wasn't sure about. I glanced back at the house one last time, her silhouette in the window, unmoving. Then I drove off, the town shrinking in my rearview mirror, leaving behind the woman who'd shaped me more than I'd admitted. That night, as I crashed in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the rain pounded the roof like accusations. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying my words. Delaying my life. It sounded cruel now, echoing in my head. Sophia had been my anchor, not my chain. She'd shared her world with me. Stories of Chicago's cutthroat architecture scene, lessons on sustainable design that fueled my career. We'd spent evenings on her porch, debating blueprints under the stars, her laughter cutting through the quiet nights. She inspired me to push my solar tech ideas further, even co-designing that unfinished home plan. But over time, her stability, the way she was rooted in Lakewood, content with small-town rhythms, started feeling like a trap. I was young, ambitious, itching for change. She was settled, wise, but unwilling to uproot. Our age gap, once a thrill, became a divide, her caution clashing with my restlessness. I tossed and turned, guilt gnawing at me. Had I been fair? Or had I just run from something real because it didn't fit my restless dreams? The rain blurred the motel window, mirroring the mess in my mind. Little did I know, back in Lakewood, Sophia was sitting at her kitchen table, flipping through our old sketchbook. The designs we'd dreamed up together, homes built from recycled materials powered by solar grids, stared back at her. For the first time in years, she picked up a pencil and redrew a line alone. Not to cling to the past, but to forge ahead. And in a blank page, undated, she scribbled, "If I was ever a barrier, let me become a path. Not for anyone else, but for myself." That note marked the birth of Innovatech, her green architecture firm that would rise from the ashes of our goodbye. But I wouldn't know that for years. For now, I was just a guy driving into the unknown, convinced I'd escaped, unaware I'd left a part of myself behind. 4 years had slipped by like water through my fingers. I'd bounced around after leaving Lakewood, first to Springfield for that solar farm gig, then up to Milwaukee for a bigger firm specializing in renewable grids. Life had been a blur of site visits, late-night calculations, and motel rooms that all smelled the same: stale coffee and recycled air. I'd climbed the ladder, becoming a lead engineer, overseeing teams that installed panels on everything from barns to high-rises. It was the freedom I'd craved, the constant motion that kept me from looking back too hard. But Lakewood? I'd avoided it like a bad memory, only driving through once for a family funeral, steering clear of Maple Road. Now, here I was, back in town for a mandatory meeting. The project was big, redeveloping the Lakeside Eco-Housing District, turning old cabins into sustainable models. My company had bid on the energy side, solar integration, battery storage, the works. I figured it'd be a quick in and out, present our tech specs, shake hands, and hit the road before nostalgia could sink its hooks in. The community center hosting the meeting was the same squat building I remembered from town halls growing up. Faded brick walls, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and that faint, musty scent of old carpet. I arrived early, laptop in hand, sliding into a seat near the front. The room filled up slowly, local officials in button-downs, a few contractors with clipboards, and reps from various firms. The coordinator, a middle-aged guy named Tom with a clipboard and a perpetual squint, kicked things off with the usual pleasantries. "We're excited about this partnership," he droned. "Today, we'll finalize the architecture lead for the build-out." He rattled off the shortlist, and my ears perked up at the last one. Innovatech. I'd heard of them, a rising star in green architecture known for innovative, eco-friendly designs that blended old structures with modern tech. Solid rep, but newish on the scene. Tom introduced their rep, and the door at the back swung open. In walked Sophia. Time froze. She looked unchanged yet transformed. Still tall and slender, her dark hair now cut shorter, framing her face with a professional edge. She wore a gray linen blazer over a simple white blouse, paired with tailored pants that spoke of quiet confidence. No more loose ponytails or casual sweaters. This was CEO Sophia Grant striding to the front with a tablet in hand and a nod to the room. Her gray eyes swept the audience, landing on me for a split second, long enough for recognition to flash, but she didn't falter. She shook Tom's hand and launched into her presentation without missing a beat. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice steady and warm, the same tone that used to cut through our late-night debates. Innovatech is thrilled to partner on this project. Our vision for the lakeside redevelopment focuses on harmony. preserving the town's wooden heritage while integrating zero-waste materials and adaptive energy systems. She clicked through slides, renderings of cabins with sloped roofs for optimal solar capture, recycled timber facades, and green roofs that doubled as insulation. It was brilliant, seamless. I sat there, my own presentation forgotten, watching her command the room. She gestured to diagrams explaining load-bearing tweaks that would boost efficiency without sacrificing aesthetics. Questions flew from the crowd: cost projections, timelines, environmental impact. She handled them all with ease, quoting stats and precedents like she'd been doing this forever. But I knew better. 4 years ago, she was sketching ideas on napkins in her kitchen, doubting if anyone would take a small-town architect seriously. Now, she was the one leading the charge. My mind raced back to that unfinished blueprint on my table the day I left. The one we'd co-created. Parts of her designs echoed it. The angled eaves for rainwater collection, the modular walls for easy upgrades. Had she built this from our scraps? When the Q&A opened, my hand shot up before I could think. Tom pointed to me. "Ethan Hayes, from RenewGrid. Go ahead." I cleared my throat, trying to sound professional. "Ms. Grant, your company's making waves. Is Innovatech a recent startup?" She turned to me, her expression neutral, but there was a glint in her eyes, something only I would catch. "We've been operational for 4 years now," she replied evenly. It all started one autumn, much like today. A single redesign that snowballed into something bigger. The room murmured approvals, but her words hit me like a gust off the lake. One autumn, like the day I walked out. She didn't elaborate, just moved on to the next question. But the implication hung there, unspoken. She'd turned my departure into her launch pad. The meeting wrapped with handshakes and next steps. Tom announced Innovatech as the official architecture partner, pairing them with my team for the energy integration. "We'll coordinate closely," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Ethan, you'll be point with Sophia's group." I nodded mechanically, packing my things as the room emptied. Sophia lingered at the front, chatting with a council member. When she finally glanced my way, our eyes met properly for the first time. No smile, no warmth. Just that steady gaze laced with something I couldn't place. Resolve? Distance? I felt a pang in my chest, a mix of regret and awe. She'd risen from the ruins I'd left, building an empire from the blueprint of our shared dreams, and here I was, back in the same town, facing the woman I'd called a barrier. As she gathered her notes and headed for the door, I realized this project wasn't just about houses. It was about unfinished business. Ours. The autumn air outside felt sharper now, carrying the scent of turning leaves and unresolved history. The meeting wrapped up with the usual round of polite nods and business cards exchanged, the room emptying out like a deflating balloon. Chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, voices echoing in the hallway as people filed toward the exit. I lingered at my seat, slowly packing my laptop into its case, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. The blueprints and slides were still projected on the screen up front, ghostly images of sustainable homes hovering in the dimming light. Sophia was chatting with Tom near the podium, her posture relaxed but professional, wrapping up some detail about timelines. I watched her from afar, my mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and should-haves. As the last stragglers left, I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder. Sophia glanced my way, our eyes locking again. This time, there was no escaping it. I walked toward her, my steps deliberate, heart pounding like it did back when we'd first started those late-night design sessions. "Sophia," I said, keeping my voice low, "can we walk out to the parking lot together?" She paused, tucking her tablet under her arm. For a moment, I thought she'd brush me off, make some excuse about a call or another meeting, but she nodded, simple and direct. "Sure." We stepped out the back door of the community center, the autumn air crisp and carrying the scent of pine from the nearby woods. The path to the lot was paved with flagstones, winding past a small garden plot where volunteers grew herbs for the town kitchen. It was quiet out here, away from the main road. The kind of silence that amplified every footstep, every rustle of leaves underfoot. We walked side by side, not too close, but close enough that I could smell the faint citrus of her shampoo, a scent that yanked me straight back to those evenings on her porch. I broke the ice first, pointing toward the demo houses visible in the distance. their frames rising like skeletons against the lake. That roof angle in your designs, it's a bit sloped, but if you factor in the winter sun path here, it could boost panel efficiency by about 12%. She glanced at me, a small smile tugging at her lips. You still notice those details? Yeah, I admitted, shoving my hands into my pockets. Old habits. We kept walking, the path curving slightly. The wind picked up, sending a swirl of red leaves dancing across the stones. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Sophia, did you really start Innovatech all by yourself? She stopped then, turning to face me fully. The late afternoon sun caught her eyes, making them shine with that unyielding clarity I'd always admired, and sometimes feared. You left to find your freedom, she said slowly, her voice even, without a trace of bitterness. And me? I only really started living after you were gone. The words landed like a punch to the gut. I felt my throat tighten. What do you mean? She resumed walking, and I fell in step beside her. Those first days, I did everything alone. I'd draw blueprints at night after the town went quiet. During the day, I'd knock on bank doors, pitching ideas to loan officers who looked at me like I was delusional. One even asked outright, "A woman in her 40s stuck in a small town. What makes you think you can change anything?" I winced, imagining her in those sterile offices, fighting for every inch. That sounds brutal. It was, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. But I kept going. I rented a tiny office above the hardware store, used my savings to prototype the first model. There were nights I wanted to quit, staring at rejection emails, wondering if it was all a fool's errand, but I didn't. Did anyone help you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Part of me hoped the answer was yes, that she hadn't shouldered it all solo. Another part dreaded it, imagining some other guy stepping in where I'd failed. She looked at me then, really looked, and there was a softness in her expression that cracked something inside me. Yes, she replied. You did. Those words you used to say, "You're better than you think." This sketch has real potential. You weren't there anymore, but your encouragement stuck. It got me through the doors that slammed in my face. I bowed my head, staring at the path beneath my feet. The guilt I'd buried for 4 years surged up, hot and unrelenting. I'd convinced myself that leaving was necessary for my growth, my ambitions. I'd painted her as the anchor weighing me down, the symbol of a life too settled, too safe. But hearing this now, I saw the truth I'd ignored. I'd run not just from the town, but from the vulnerability of what we had. She wasn't a barrier. She was the foundation I'd built my dreams on. And in leaving, I'd forced her to rebuild alone, from scratch. I'm sorry, I said, the words tumbling out unfiltered. No defenses, no excuses. For calling you a barrier. For everything. She didn't respond immediately. We walked a few more steps, the lake coming into view through the trees, its surface rippling under the breeze. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. There are words we don't get to say in time, but there are also things that need time to prove themselves. I nodded, the weight of it all settling in. In that moment, the distance between us felt a little less vast, not bridged entirely, but acknowledged. The memories flooded back, not just the painful goodbye, but the good ones. Her teaching me about load-bearing walls over homemade stew, us laughing at botched sketches until dawn, the way she'd challenge my ideas and make them better. I'd left to grow, but she'd grown right where she stood, turning my absence into her strength. We reached the parking lot, our cars side by side like old friends. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Thanks for walking with me, I said, not ready to let the conversation end. She unlocked her door, pausing with her hand on the handle. Anytime, Ethan. As she drove off, I stood there, watching her taillights fade. The path we'd just walked felt like more than a stroll. It was a step toward understanding. Not forgiveness yet, but a start. And for the first time in years, I wondered if some things could be rebuilt, even after being torn down. 1 month later, the air in Lakewood had turned sharper, the kind of crisp fall bite that signaled winter was lurking just around the corner. The leaves had mostly fallen now, carpeting the paths in a crunchy mosaic of red and gold. I'd been back in town more than I'd planned. Coordinating with the team on the eco-housing project meant weekly trips from Milwaukee, crashing at a budget inn near the highway. It was all business: site surveys, material checks, and endless emails about timelines. But underneath the spreadsheets and blueprints, there was Sophia. Our walk after that first meeting had cracked open a door I'd thought was bolted shut. We hadn't talked personally since. Not really, just nods in passing, quick updates and group calls, but her words echoed in my head. Things that need time to prove themselves. I wondered if she meant the project or us. The technical meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon in the same community center, but this time in a smaller conference room. Long table, whiteboard smeared with faded markers, and a coffee pot percolating in the corner. About a dozen of us gathered. My Renew Grid crew, a few local contractors, Tom the coordinator, and Sophia with two of her Innovatech associates. She arrived last, tablet in hand, her presence filling the space like it always did. We exchanged a brief hello, nothing more. I took a seat across from her, flipping open my notes. Tom kicked things off, recapping progress. Foundations were in, framing up on the first model home. Then we dove into the details, my team presenting tweaks to the solar integration. I'd spent nights crunching numbers, looking for efficiencies. To cut costs on the battery arrays, I explained, pulling up a slide, we recommend adjusting the facade on the south-facing walls, flatten the angle a bit, reduces material needs without much loss in capture during peak hours. My guys nodded along. It made sense on paper. The contractors murmured agreement, eyes on the projected savings, 15% off the energy budget. Tom leaned forward, interested. Solid proposal, Ethan. Thoughts from architecture? All eyes turned to Sophia. She studied the slide for a moment, her finger tracing something on her tablet. Then she looked up, her voice cutting through the room like a precise blueprint line. No. The word hung there, simple and final. The room went still. I felt a flush creep up my neck, part surprise, part defensiveness. She leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. This structure isn't just a frame for panels. It's about balance, aesthetics that honor the town's history, energy that sustains without dominating, and spaces that feel human. Your solar system needs to adapt to what can't be compromised, not the other way around. Her words landed like a soft slap, not angry, but unyielding. The contractors shifted in their seats. One of my techs cleared his throat. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. She was right. The change would alter her core design, turning elegant slopes into boxy efficiency. But admitting that in front of everyone? My pride prickled. Sophia, the numbers are one piece, she interrupted gently but firmly. But if we flatten those walls, we lose the passive heating benefits in winter. And visually, it turns a home into a warehouse. Innovatech's built on integration, not concession. Tom rubbed his chin. Point taken. Ethan? I met her gaze across the table. Her eyes were cool, professional, but beneath it, I saw a flicker. Something thawing like the first crack in lake ice after a long freeze. She wasn't just defending her work, she was challenging me the way she used to during our old sketching sessions. Back then, it had sparked better ideas. Now, it forced me to see beyond the spreadsheets. I exhaled, nodding. All right, we'll stick to the original. I'll recalculate the specs myself to make it work. The room relaxed, murmurs of good call rippling around. Tom wrapped up, assigning follow-ups. As people gathered their things, Sophia stood, slipping her tablet into her bag. She didn't linger, just gave a general, "Thanks, everyone," and headed for the door. I watched her go, the way her shoulders squared with quiet strength. That moment in the meeting, it wasn't just about the facade. It was a mirror. I'd tried to reshape her vision to fit my efficiencies, just like I'd reshaped our relationship to fit my restlessness 4 years ago. I caught up to her in the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "Sophia, wait." She turned, eyebrow arched slightly. "Something else on the design?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "That was fair. I was pushing too hard for the easy fix." She studied me for a beat. "Sometimes the easy fix isn't the right one." Her words lingered, double-layered. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." She didn't smile, but the coolness in her eyes softened just a fraction, like frost giving way to spring thaw. Then she walked away, leaving me in the empty hall. As I headed to my truck, the lake breeze whipping through the lot, I realized something profound. Nothing between us had truly vanished. The connection, the respect, the way she pushed me to be better. It was all still there, buried under years and regrets. Not gone, just waiting to be uncovered. And for the first time, I wondered if I could adapt too. Not just the solar panels, but me. Maybe it wasn't too late to fit into what couldn't be changed. The final week of the project arrived like the last breath of autumn before winter locked everything down. The model home stood complete now, framed in reclaimed timber, roof sloped just right for the solar panels, and the new green roof already sprouting tiny shoots from the seed trays we'd planted. The air smelled of fresh-cut lumber and drying concrete, mixed with the faint tang of lake water carried on the breeze. I'd been on site every day, troubleshooting wiring and double-checking efficiencies, but my mind kept drifting to Sophia. The month since our last real talk had been a quiet storm. Work emails, group calls, quick nods in passing. No deep conversations, no accusations, just the slow grind of collaboration. Yet every time I saw her, pointing out a detail to a contractor or sketching on her tablet, I felt the pull, the unfinished line between us. That afternoon, the crew had wrapped early, leaving the place empty except for the hum of a distant generator. I walked up the new stone path, boots crunching on gravel, and knocked lightly on the front door. It opened almost immediately. Sophia stood there in a soft flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied back loosely. She didn't look surprised. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. I was just finishing up. The interior smelled like herbs and warm wood. She'd set up the kitchen as a temporary workspace, blueprints spread across the island, a kettle still steaming on the stove. 2 mugs sat waiting. She poured tea, herbal, the way she always did, and slid one toward me. "You still prefer peppermint over ginger, right?" I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my palms. "Yeah, thanks." We didn't linger inside. She nodded toward the back porch, and we stepped out onto the wide deck overlooking the lake. The sun was low, painting the water in streaks of gold and orange. 2 Adirondack chairs faced the view, a small table between them holding the signed project files and a stack of leftover sketches. We sat without a word at first, just sipping the tea as the wind rustled the last stubborn leaves overhead. The silence wasn't awkward. It was familiar, like the quiet evenings we'd shared years ago before everything got complicated. I stared at the lake, the way the light danced on the surface, and finally spoke. "If your next design has any room left, any space that doesn't have someone living in it yet, I wouldn't mind starting from the first brick." She set her mug down carefully, the porcelain clinking softly against the wood. Her eyes met mine, steady and clear. "That room's been in the drawing since 4 years ago," she said quietly. "It just hasn't had anyone knock on the door." The words settled between us, simple and heavy. No promises, no grand declarations. We didn't reach for each other, didn't bridge the physical space with a touch. There was no kiss, no tears, no rush to label what this was. We just sat there, side by side, watching the sun sink lower, the lake turning silver in the fading light. I thought about the years I'd spent running from her, from this town, from the fear of settling. I'd told myself I needed motion, bigger horizons, the kind of life that didn't fit into a quiet lakeside routine. But here, in this unfinished house we'd both helped build, I realized settling didn't have to mean stagnation. It could mean choosing to stay, to adapt, to let something grow slowly without forcing it into a shape. Sophia leaned back in her chair, her gaze on the horizon. "We don't have to name it," she said almost to herself. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." I nodded. "Yeah, names can make things smaller than they are." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and water. We finished our tea in that comfortable quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. When the sun dipped below the trees, we stood, gathering the mugs and files. She walked me to the door, the porch light flickering on as dusk settled. "Thanks for the tea," I said. "Anytime," she replied. I stepped off the porch, heading to my truck parked in the drive. The house behind me glowed softly, a beacon in the gathering dark. I didn't look back as I drove away, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt like I was circling back, slowly, carefully, to something that had always been waiting. Some connections don't need a title, they just need time, space, and the courage to show up when the door finally opens. And sometimes that's enough.